I want you to imagine something for a second. Think back to the very last time you were completely, totally alone.
Right. And really alone.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't just mean sitting quietly by yourself reading a book or something. I mean a moment where you were physically inhabiting your space with absolute, uninhibited freedom.
Which is surprisingly rare if you think about it.
It is. It really is. Like maybe you were in your car driving down an empty highway at night and you were just absolutely belting out a song at the top of your lungs.
Hitting all the wrong notes.
Oh, 100%. Hitting the worst notes imaginable, but feeling that vibration in your chest. Or maybe you were pacing around your living room having this intense out loud argument with someone who wasn't even there.
We've all done that.
Gesturing wildly to an empty sofa to just really make your point.
Yeah.
In that fraction of a second, you were entirely unself-conscious. The concept of an outside world it didn't exist.
It's pure existence.
Right. Now, I want you to recall the exact physical sensation, that sudden, chilling, heavy plunge in your stomach, when you glanced over and realized the blinds were open and a neighbor was walking their dog just staring right at you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a profound physiological shift. I mean, the temperature in the room seemingly drops.
It did. You get cold.
Your posture fundamentally changes in an instant. You go from expansive to contracted. Like, the brain registers that sudden external gaze, not just as a social faux pas, but almost as a physical threat to your current state of being.
A threat. Wow.
Yeah, the amygdala fires up, dumping this microdose of adrenaline into your system because you have essentially been caught outside the bounds of normal, predictable tribe behavior.
So it's literally a survival response. You freeze or you instantly deploy this cover-up maneuver.
Yes, the classic cover-up.
You know exactly what I mean. You pretend you were doing something completely mundane. You go from passionately lip-syncing a ballad to aggressively scratching your nose and pretending to check your teeth in the rearview mirror.
It is a desperate scramble to reestablish normalcy.
It really is. And that whiplash, the brutal speed at which we transition from pure, unobserved existence to performing for an audience, is such a universal, somewhat humiliating human experience.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And that specific phenomenon is exactly what we are deconstructing today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to explore a relatively short but incredibly dense piece of writing that takes that precise moment of being observed, puts it under a microscope, and unpacks what it actually means for the way we live our entire lives.
And the source material we are working with is fantastic. It's a newsletter post published on August 11th, 2025. It is titled When No One is Watching, and it was written by an author named Jachima Anyatonwe.
Published on a Substack platform called Bard Influence, right?
Exactly. Bard Influence. And what makes this specific text so potent is that it doesn't approach this massive psychological concept through dry clinical data.
Which we get a lot of.
Right, way too much. Instead, it uses one very brief, highly specific anecdote to just crack open a sprawling philosophical conversation.
And we're also analyzing the post's comment section, plus examining some really intriguing metadata surrounding the author's larger body of work, which honestly provides a totally necessary framework for understanding their overall philosophy.
It gives it so much context.
Yeah, so our approach here is going to be akin to a psychological excavation. We are going to take this single fleeting story about a boy dancing in the street, and we are going to dig right into the bedrock beneath it.
We want to extract the lessons it holds about authenticity, the incredible weight of the societal gaze, and what actual functional freedom looks like in a world that is obsessed with visibility.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at how the author sets the stage. We begin in a baseline state of what we might call uncorrupted reality.
Uncorrupted reality, I like that.
Thanks. So the author describes a slow, ordinary evening. The phrasing used is that the wind isn't in a rush, and neither are they. They're just walking down their street with that familiar, heavy-footed rhythm you settle into after a long, unremarkable day.
And setting the scene with that specific atmosphere of slowness and exhaustion is a deliberate narrative choice by the author. It establishes a completely neutral environment.
Right, it's just quiet.
Exactly. The canvas of the evening is blank. There is no heightened emotion, no urgency, no external stimuli forcing a reaction. It is the definition of the mundane.
Right, it's the quiet emptiness of a suburban street at dusk. And against that entirely blank canvas, the author spots a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. And this boy is dancing.
But not just swaying.
No, he isn't just swaying idly or like kicking a pebble. The author explicitly states he's dancing wildly and passionately. And the detail that fundamentally anchors this entire scene is that there's absolutely no music playing.
That is the key.
Not a faint hum from a passing car's radio, not a neighbor's playlist drifting over a fence. There is total silence. Yet this kid is entirely consumed by the movement.
He's beautiful.
The text describes his hands waving, like they're conducting a symphony only he can hear. It describes his tiny feet doing battle with the, quote, sideway carpet grasses. It's an explosion of internal life violently manifesting on an ordinary sidewalk.
What's fascinating here is that the absence of music is the critical variable in this equation. I mean, if there were an external beat, even a really faint one, the dance would be a reaction.
Because he'd be dancing to them.
Right. It would be an organism responding to an environmental stimulus. But by removing the music, the origin point of the joy shifts entirely inward. The rhythm is internally generated.
Well, okay, yeah.
Which means the movement is unprompted by anything outside of the boy's own biology and consciousness. It is the purest form of intrinsic motivation.
Which completely changes how we view the action. He isn't dancing to something. He is just dancing. The author has this line to describe the phenomenon. They write that the boy danced like joy had a body and had borrowed his limbs.
That is such a striking phrase.
Isn't it? Saying joy borrowed his limbs implies the boy isn't even the one in control. It suggests he has totally surrendered his agency to the emotion. It's almost like a benign possession rather than a physical action he is consciously executing.
And the mechanics of that state are deeply documented in developmental psychology. What the author is describing as joy borrowing his limbs is the complete bypassing of the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, the planning part of the brain.
Exactly. The part responsible for planning, self-censorship, and social moderation. The boy is in a state of flow. When a human being, especially a child whose societal conditioning is still relatively thin, enters this state, they achieve total internal alignment.
They aren't thinking about the next step.
Yeah. No, not at all. They are not thinking about the steps. The emotion and the physical expression of that emotion happen simultaneously. There is zero friction between what he feels and what his body does.
So let's look at that phrase, sideway carpet grasses. The author points out that his feet are battling these grasses. When you are an adult walking down the street, you don't even register the grass unless it needs mowing.
Right. It's just background noise.
Just completely ignored. But to a 6-year-old who is completely immersed in a flow state, the environment physically morphs to serve the internal narrative. The grass isn't just a lawn, it's an adversary, or a dance partner, or a stage.
The macroscopic world shrinks down to the microscopic level of his immediate physical interaction.
Yes, he is entirely disconnected from external realities. I mean, he doesn't care that he's on a public thoroughfare, he doesn't care about the concrete, and he certainly doesn't possess the concept of judgment in that moment.
But that disconnection is what makes the state so incredibly fragile. He is operating as a closed circuit. The joy originates within him, is expressed by him, and is experienced by him.
A closed circuit. I love that analogy.
Yeah, because it requires absolutely zero input, validation, or sustenance from the outside world. It is entirely self-sufficient. And honestly, that closed circuit is the holy grail of human psychological well-being.
We spend our whole lives trying to get that back.
We really do. We have an entire modern industry like mindfulness retreats, isolation tanks, cognitive behavioral therapies, dedicated solely to helping overly conditioned adults recapture a fraction of the self-sufficiency that this 6-year-old is demonstrating on a random patch of sidewalk. We are all trying to find our way back to the sideway carpet grasses.
But closed circuits are practically impossible to maintain in a society made of other people. Which brings us to the inciting incident of the author's narrative.
The inevitable disruption.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author is walking down the street observing this beautiful, chaotic display of pure existence. They are smiling admiringly. They haven't made a sound. They haven't interrupted or spoken. And then, inevitably, the boy turns his head.
The physical environment suddenly intrudes on the internal symphony.
His eyes meet the author's eyes. The connection is forged. And the author writes, "In that instant, the dance died." But the tragedy of the scene isn't just that it stopped.
It's how it stopped.
Exactly. The author specifically emphasizes the pacing. They say, it didn't die abruptly. No, what happened was slow. If I'm startled by a loud noise, I jump instantly. But this slow death of the dance, it makes me think of a turtle that senses a predator.
That's a great visual.
It doesn't just vanish, it deliberately, methodically pulls its head and its legs inside its shell until there's nothing left but armor. It's a mechanical retraction.
The turtle analogy is highly accurate because it highlights the cognitive processing taking place. An abrupt stop is an autonomic reflex. A slow stop is a conscious, calculated shutdown.
He's actively dismantling it.
Yes. The boy is actively packing away his joy in real time. He is assessing the threat level of the gaze and dismantling his flow state piece by piece to protect himself.
And you can visualize the exact sequence of the shutdown based on the author's description. The feet stilled, the fire in his eyes dimmed, the laughter folded inwards.
That phrase, laughter folding inwards.
That concept is fascinating. It implies the joy didn't evaporate. It was forcibly compressed back inside the body because it was deemed unsafe for external display. The author notes that the boy didn't just stop moving, he shrunk.
He physically diminished his own footprint.
He became small, careful, and hyper-self-aware. I mean, think about a time you shrunk to fit the perceived expectations of someone watching you. It's a terrible feeling.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we look at the evolutionary psychology underpinning this reaction, it answers a very vital question. Why does a child, at merely 6 or 7 years old, already possess the instinct to fear the gaze of an adult who is smiling admiringly?
Because the smile didn't help at all.
No, the author's smile did not communicate threat, yet the boy reacted as if it did. This is because, from an evolutionary standpoint, the survival of a human being depends entirely on their inclusion in the tribe. To be ostracized is to die.
Right, thousands of years of programming.
Exactly. Therefore, any behavior that is deemed erratic, illegible, or far outside the established norms of the tribe, like dancing silently and wildly on a public path, risks alienation.
It makes you a target.
Yes, the brain is hardwired to monitor the environment for observation. The moment the boy registers another human, his internal alarm system signals that his illegible behavior is a liability.
So it literally doesn't matter that the author was smiling. The quality of the observation is completely irrelevant. The mere fact of the observation is what kills the dance.
And the author articulates the exact internal monologue that accompanies this survival mechanism. They list the questions that flood the boy's mind. They write, am I doing this right? Do I look okay? What will they think? Is this too much? Should I shrink a little? Just in case.
Just in case.
Those are not the thoughts of a child in distress. Those are the calculations of an organism desperately trying to recalibrate its behavior to ensure it remains acceptable to the pack. Should I shrink, just in case, is the ultimate defensive posture of the socialized human.
This actually reminds me of one of the author's other Substack posts from the metadata we reviewed. Jachin Ma wrote a post titled, Men's Mental Health Awareness Series 1. Dearest gentle reader, why don't men cry?
Ah, yes. The parallels there are undeniable.
It is the exact same phenomenon playing out on a different biological stage. Why don't men cry? It isn't because the tear ducts stop functioning or the emotional pain is lesser. It's because a natural physiological response is being systematically suppressed by the fear of the societal gaze.
Right. Society has designated male tears as illegible or unacceptable.
So the moment a man feels that internal pressure building, the gaze, even if it suggests the imagined gaze of society, forces him to ask, what will they think? Do I look weak? Should I shrink a little? And the tears fold inwards. The little boy on the street, pulling his laughter back inside his chest, is learning the foundational lessons of how to perform acceptable masculinity.
The through line in the author's work is incredibly consistent. The suppression of the dance and the suppression of tears share the exact same pathology. They're casualties of the performative burden.
Performative burden. That's a great way to say it.
And there is a brilliant comment left on the original post by a reader named Oracle that provides a hard science framework for this psychological phenomenon. Oracle writes, this reminds me of the observer effect. An object behaves differently when it is being observed. In other words, observation inevitably alters reality.
The observer effect. That's a cornerstone concept in quantum mechanics. I know it fundamentally has to do with how particles behave differently when measured.
Yes, the classic example is the double-slit experiment in physics. Particles like electrons behave as waves of probability when unobserved, creating an interference pattern. But the moment a detector is placed to observe which slit the electron passes through, the wave function collapses.
Stop it being a wave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The electron behaves like a localized particle. The act of measurement forces reality to commit to a specific measurable state. What the commenter oracle is doing, and what Giacomo is illustrating, is mapping this quantum mechanical principle directly onto human consciousness.
That makes terrifying sense. Before the author looked at him, the boy was like the unobserved electron. He was a wave of pure probability and emotion. He wasn't constrained to any specific shape or definition.
A wave of pure emotion. I love that.
But the moment the author's eyes landed on him, the detector was turned on. The wave function of his joy collapsed. He had to instantly localize into a specific definable particle, a normal, quiet little boy standing on a sidewalk. The observation forced him to commit to a reality that made sense to the observer.
And the psychological mechanism of that collapse is the fracturing of the self. When you are alone in your living room, you are singular. You're simply the entity experiencing the moment.
Right.
But the second the gaze of another person enters the equation, your consciousness splits. You are still the entity experiencing the room, but you abruptly generate a second entity, the evaluator. You project your consciousness into the mind of the person watching you, and you look back at yourself through their eyes.
You become the dancer and the critic simultaneously.
This is the fundamental tragic shift from being to performing. When the boy is alone, he is being joy. When he is seen, he is performing a version of himself that he calculates is safe for public consumption.
So the questions the author noted, like, am I doing this right? Those are the anxieties of a performer trying to anticipate the reviews of an audience.
It is the absolute death of authenticity.
Which leads us directly into how the author processes this event into a broader philosophical definition of freedom. Because witnessing this incredibly pure thing get crushed, just by looking at it, clearly profoundly impacted Giacomo.
You can tell it resonated deeply.
They take this micro-interaction and scale it up to propose that the truest, most honest, most alive, and crucially the most messy parts of human existence happen entirely away from the spotlight. The genuine human experience occurs in the quiet when the music plays solely in our own minds.
This raises an important question about what freedom actually is. The author distills this realization into a three-part definition of true freedom, and it is a very specific, demanding criteria.
Yeah, it really is.
They state that freedom is, 1, the ability to move without permission, 2, the ability to laugh without an audience, and 3, the ability to be wild without fear of translation.
I want to break these down completely because they are incredibly dense. Let's start with the first. Moving without permission. Obviously, this doesn't mean breaking the law. It seems to refer to bypassing the invisible societal checkpoints we constantly ask for clearance from.
Exactly.
The boy didn't ask if the sidewalk was an appropriate venue for a contemporary dance routine. He bypassed the permission structure entirely.
Moving without permission is the rejection of spatial and behavioral policing. As adults, we are constantly navigating a matrix of unspoken rules about where and how we are allowed to occupy space.
Oh, constantly.
You sit quietly on the train. You walk at a steady pace on the sidewalk. You contain your physical exuberance to designated areas like gyms or dance floors. To move without permission is to reclaim sovereignty over your physical vessel.
So it's deciding that your body's need to express itself supersedes society's desire for predictable environments.
Right. It's taking ownership of your physical presence.
That bridges perfectly to the second tenet, laughing without an audience. This one feels particularly pointed at modern culture. In our current digital ecosystem, if you experience something hilarious or beautiful or profound, the immediate, almost involuntary instinct is to pull out a phone and document it.
Yes, the instinct to capture is so deeply ingrained now.
You share it, you post it to a story. It's as if the joy is theoretical until it has been validated by a metric. Until someone else likes it or replies with a laughing emoji, the loop isn't closed. Laughing without an audience demands that we sever that dependency.
It is the radical notion that your happiness is fully actualized the moment you feel it.
Period.
Period. Because the attention economy has conditioned us to view our own lives as content. When you require an audience for your laughter, you are essentially outsourcing the validation of your own internal state.
That's a scary thought. Outsourcing your validation.
But that's what we do. You are asking a crowd to confirm that your joy is real. Giacomo is arguing that this reliance degrades the emotion. True freedom is self-containment.
It is the ability to experience a moment of profound amusement. Let it wash over you and let it pass without ever feeling the desperate urge to monetize it for social capital.
And that leads us to the most complex part of the definition. being wild without fear of translation.
Yeah, let's talk about the phrase fear of translation. When they say that, it makes me think of having a highly specialized, nuanced inside joke and then being forced to explain it to a complete stranger.
That is the worst feeling.
It's awful. You have to strip away all the context, define the terms, and flatten the nuance just to make it somewhat comprehensible. And by the end of the explanation, the joke isn't funny anymore. It's dead on the table. You've killed the thing simply by translating it.
That is a very precise mechanical understanding of the concept. Sociologically, this is related to the concept of legibility.
Legibility.
Yes. Society functions by categorizing people and behaviors. It needs to know what you are so it knows how to deal with you. Are you a threat? Are you productive? Are you conforming?
It wants to put you in a box.
Exactly. To be wild in this context means to be complex, messy, contradictory, and entirely uncategorizable. The fear of translation is the exhausting anxiety that if you show the world your complex, illegible self, they will misunderstand it, judge it, or force you to simplify it into a label they recognize.
So true freedom is the right to remain illegible. It is demanding the space to exist without having to constantly provide a subtitle track for everyone around you.
Subtitle track, yes.
The author contrasts this raw, sacred version of unobserved freedom with what they call the charm of public accolades and things that trend. They write, your most beautiful dance might never trend, be applauded, or will it ever be witnessed by anyone but you, but that doesn't make it less worthy.
Which is a sharp spear thrown directly at the heart of visibility culture.
It really is. If a tree falls in a forest and nobody films a TikTok of it, did it even happen? The author is emphatically saying yes. It happened, it was magnificent, and the fact that it was denied an audience is precisely what kept it pure.
It represents a wholesale rejection of the metric-driven life. Jachima is divorcing value from visibility. The observer effect, by its very nature, forces the subject to conform to the expectations of the observer.
Right.
Therefore, the things that are most heavily observed, the things that trend and garner massive public accolades, are often the most sanitized, flattened, and performative versions of reality.
Because they have been aggressively translated for mass consumption. The author argues that your highest value exists in the untranslated, unwitnessed moments of your life.
Exactly.
Okay, I track the philosophy completely. It is beautiful. It is profound. Yeah. But this is the exact moment where I have to throw a massive wrench into the gears. Because when we reach the postscript of this newsletter, we hit a wall of what looks like staggering irony. We need to talk about the creator's dilemma.
The tension between the message and the medium.
Yes. Wait, let me lay out the contradiction. At the bottom of this very post, in the PS, Jachima actively promotes their own book. The title of the book is How to Write Stories or Articles That Actually Matter.
Oh.
And the text describes it not just as a how-to guide, but as a companion for trying to express something real in a world that's always watching via critical lenses. And if that wasn't enough, the author explicitly solicits feedback, asking readers to drop their thoughts and reviews in the comments section.
I see where you're going with this.
Hold on, right. They are utilizing a newsletter, which requires a subscriber base and an audience, to tell people that the most authentic moments in life happen without an audience. And then they pivot to selling a book on how to write for an audience that is watching through critical lenses while actively asking for public reviews.
It feels objectively hypocritical.
It does. You can't be the guru of unobserved living while aggressively marketing your unobserved thoughts and asking for a star rating. So what does this all mean? How do we reconcile this?
It is entirely fair to point out that friction. It seems paradoxical on the surface. But if we analyze the mechanics of the creative process, this isn't hypocrisy. It is a highly sophisticated, pragmatic survival guide for artists.
A survival guide.
Yes. The author is using the dancing boy not just as a metaphor for how to live, but as a precise parable for how to create.
But the very act of writing the newsletter alters the thought. As soon as you open a blank document with the intent to publish it to a Substack, you are no longer dancing alone in the street. You have already invited the neighbor to look through the blinds. You've collapsed the wave function before you even typed a word.
And the mechanism to bypass that is what we call the two-step creative process.
Okay, walk me through that.
The author understands that art ultimately requires an audience to be shared, but the conception of the art must remain radically isolated. Step one is the initial act of creation. The first draft, the sudden spark of an idea, the messy emotional outpouring.
That is the dance.
That is the dance. And according to Jachima's philosophy, that initial act must be aggressively protected from the gaze. It must be done in a dark room, ignoring the critical lenses. If a writer sits down and their very first thought is, what will my subscribers think? Will this title trend? Will they leave good reviews?
Then the observer effect has contaminated the petri dish.
Exactly. The writer will preemptively shrink their own idea to make it safe and legible.
They will fold their own laughter inwards during the outlining phase.
Precisely the danger. You have to write that first draft like the little boy dancing without music. You must achieve flow. You have to capture that unobserved authenticity on the page.
But you still have to publish it.
Right. However, the author is not a monk living on a mountain. They are a working writer. They acknowledge that the world is watching. The critical lenses do exist. This is where step 2 comes in. The book, How to Write Stories or Articles That Actually Matter, is explicitly described as a companion for expressing something real in a world that's watching. The dilemma of the creator is how to take that wildly authentic, unobserved first draft and bravely present it to the observing world without letting the anticipation of their gaze ruin the initial joy.
So it's about carrying the closed circuit into the public square. The newsletter we are reading is the end product of someone who danced completely alone in their room, wrestled with a profound truth about human nature, and then undertook the incredibly difficult, brave work of translating it.
Translating it without fear.
Right. Without watering it down for an audience. They are offering the raw emotion to the critical lenses without shrinking.
They're providing a blueprint for surviving the gaze without compromising the soul. To understand how deeply entrenched this philosophy is in Jotshima's daily practice, we really need to examine the broader architecture of the Bard influence universe.
Yeah, let's look at the metadata.
The source material provided us with metadata spanning 6 years of publication. The tagline promises life's twists and turns, thought-provoking reflections, practical insights, and a dash of wit.
And let's look at the first post title provided. It says, "This year I failed poetry again. And it taught me what's worth keeping and what needs to go." Just from the title, the level of vulnerability is striking.
I failed poetry again.
Yeah. This is an author who is aggressively refusing to curate a flawless, highly produced digital persona. Admitting to failure, and specifically a repeated failure in a deeply subjective creative pursuit like poetry, is inherently messy.
It is the literary equivalent of waving your hands out of rhythm to an invisible symphony.
It totally is. They're exposing their unshrunk, imperfect self to the audience on purpose.
Because the willingness to document failure publicly is a direct rebellion against the performative culture we discussed earlier. If the observer effect dictates that we perform competence and success to remain acceptable to the tribe, publicly stating, "I failed again," is a deliberate short-circuiting of that system.
It signals to the audience that the author will not translate their experiences into a neat, victorious narrative just to be palatable.
Exactly.
We already touched on the second post, Men's Mental Health Awareness Series 1, Dearest Gentle Reader, Why Don't Men Cry? And how it mirrors the suppression of the dancing boy. But looking at the phrasing, Dearest Gentle Reader, there is an intimacy there.
A very specific tone.
Yeah, addressing the audience not as a faceless crowd of critics, but as confidants.
And that changes the dynamic of the gaze. If the gaze is hostile or judging, we shrink. By addressing the audience as gentle readers, the author is attempting to construct a safe environment where the observer effect is neutralized by empathy.
They are trying to create a communal space where the fear of translation is unnecessary.
Right.
That brings us to the third post title, which definitely delivers on the promised dash of wit. It reads, "Stop thanking the universe. It's silly. If you pray to or thank the universe who's listening." On one hand, it's funny, but looking at it through the lens of our entire discussion, it's also a critique of passive performance.
Passive performance is a huge issue.
Thanking the universe has become a trendy, deeply performative, spiritual buzzword online. People post it to signal gratitude without having to engage with any specific, messy reality or personal agency. The author is calling it out.
They are challenging their readers to demand something more active, more direct, and more authentic from their own lives, rather than relying on vague, fashionable slogans.
The connective tissue running through all these posts is a relentless drive to strip away the artifice of modern existence. Jotsma wants to dismantle the stage we have all built for ourselves.
And we can see the tangible results of that vulnerability in the way the audience responds. The provided material includes a comment from a user named the Eliarjo Nigu. The comment simply says, "This is so lovely to read. OBM, thank you."
OBM. That is an Igbo term of endearment, isn't it? It translates roughly to my heart or my love.
It does. It is a term of profound familial affection.
Yeah.
And what is remarkable here is the sociological outcome.
Yeah.
By entirely refusing to perform, By writing about failing poetry, by crying out against the suppression of male emotion, by mocking performative spirituality, and by writing from that isolated, unobserved space, Jatim has paradoxically fostered a much deeper, more authentic connection with their readers than if they had tried to write perfectly curated, SEO-optimized content designed to trend.
Because the audience recognizes the authenticity. They see the raw, untranslated humanity, and they respond to it with their own vulnerability. It's not just a content creator and a consumer, it's a genuine human connection forged in the comments section.
By risking illegibility, the author found the people who already speak their language.
Which brings this entire exploration full circle. We started this deep dive looking at a child lost in an innocent, completely unobserved flow state on a quiet suburban sidewalk.
The boy dancing with no music.
Exactly. We witnessed the heartbreaking, mechanical shutdown of his joy, the turtle pulling his head into its shell, the moment the gaze of an adult fell upon him.
A universal experience.
We explored the evolutionary and quantum mechanical parallels of the observer effect that forces all of us to constantly split our consciousness and perform for the tribe. And we unpacked the author's ultimate, radical definition of true freedom.
The ability to move without societal permission.
To experience joy without demanding an audience's validation.
And to exist in all our messy complexity without the exhausting burden of making ourselves legible to a world watching through critical lenses.
The ultimate takeaway that Jakima offers to you, the listener, is not a demand to run away and live in the woods. It is a much harder, more practical mandate. Keep dancing. Maintain your internal rhythm even when the music isn't playing.
Guard those moments of unobserved authenticity fiercely. And more importantly, when you inevitably are seen, because we all must exist in society, when the world does turn its evaluative gaze upon you, refuse to collapse the wave function of your own soul.
Refuse to lose yourself to the seductive charm of public applause. Your most beautiful, complicated, authentic dance might never trend, it might never go viral, and it might be entirely misunderstood by the masses, but it is infinitely worthy simply because it is undeniably yours.
It is yours alone.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought to chew on. If it is fundamentally true, as the author posits and the psychology supports, that our truest, most honest, most messy and unfiltered selves only ever fully emerge when we are completely alone and unobserved, how is it mathematically possible to ever truly know another human being?
That is the big question.
Are we all just interacting with each other's carefully translated avatars forever? Or is the highest ultimate goal of human connection to search endlessly until we find that one rare person with whom the observer effect simply vanishes? A person with whom you can dance wildly, knowing you are completely, totally seen, but miraculously no longer feeling observed. Think about that.